Question number 6 is, why do some people criticise the SCoPEd framework? Some of the issues highlighted with the SCoPEd project include the methodology, which I've already briefly spoken about, the evidence-based methodology. There's been criticism of the evidence-based methods used to complete the research because it's based on an approach that's used for a different type of therapy, namely CBT, or cognitive behaviour therapy practice, which is within the NHS or IAPT, improving access to psychological therapies. And therefore, many people see it as being inappropriate to use this evidence-based research to map out a field that is potentially much more humanistic and far less easy to map out. For example, you might speak to a person-centred therapist who doesn't believe that their practice can be examined in any evidence-based research. And so it's very important that when we are trying to examine many types of therapy together and make a framework, that we use a method that is appropriate for all of them. So that's one of the criticisms. The document also openly states an absence of ethical consideration because it's not seen as being involved with people actually interacting with the research. And the potential impact of the project, therefore, after consultation, concerns critics that if we're talking about SCoPEd as a research project, sure, we should consider the ethics of speaking to people and collecting the data, but depending on what SCoPEd is going to be used for, we need to be really careful with the ethics of how it's used. And so there's a huge criticism out there that this is not being included. Whilst SCoPEd, the document signposts some intention for improving access to services, jobs, training provision, without a robust plan for the outcome, the project is also seen to be without a clear agenda. Now, there are also issues highlighted around the document showing a tiered hierarchy of competency. And this is one of the key bugbears that people are finding with this. So, column A, formerly called counsellors, and column C, formerly psychotherapists, are seen to be in hierarchy with counsellors at the bottom, column A, advanced counsellor in the middle, column B, and then psychotherapists at the top, or column C. And this is a hierarchy within the document, within a field that as it stands doesn't have any hierarchy. There's no official definition of difference between counselling and psychotherapy, something that surprises people quite often. So because there's no legal distinction between the two titles, they're not protected titles here in the UK, the difference is highly contentious amongst therapists themselves, and some practitioners are concerned that SCoPEd could create an artificial hierarchical differentiation, which would have other implications. So when we think about this and look forward, it could have implications for the industry that are yet unknown, and some critics claim these could be highly detrimental, particularly to those identifying as counsellors or column A practitioners, because their work, when we look at it within this framework, could be said to be downgraded. So that's one thing to look at. Have a look at the case studies, see where you think you lie, and then have a little bit of time to consider whether you feel that represents everything appropriately. There's also been criticism about the SCoPEd project and how it has only used certain modalities or certain types of therapy to collect information. So in the article or the links below, you'll see a BACP's page on the different types of therapy, which are very broad. Some people state there's thousands of types. But this framework is seen by some to be incapable of representing the diversity of the profession as a whole, especially when representing every member of the profession needs to be done fairly. And in order to do so, it become more and more generic, and possibly would need to involve all of the membership bodies that hold those accredited registers with the Professional Standards Authority. And then just to remind you that only 3 of those membership bodies are actually included in the SCoPEd collaboration, and therefore we have 8 of them that aren't, and they are excluded. So have a look at the question 2 video or the question 2 section of this to understand that a little bit more. Then talking more about modalities, many believe that the current iteration favours particular modalities, philosophical viewpoints and trainings, and therefore is not representative of the broader field. For example, if you look at columns A, B and C, you'll notice that there's more medicalised terminology in columns B and C, and things such as using the unconscious, Freudian psychoanalytic terminology. And therefore, some people have suggested that the project favours psychoanalytic approaches to talking therapy, which, as the critics have pointed out, were also overrepresented in the teams responsible for the compilation of the framework, namely the expert reference group. So have a look at the methodologies document for that. And also just be informed, in case you don't know, that there was an additional 2 people incorporated into the team after the first iteration, and they were from more humanistic backgrounds, person-centred, etc. Then we also have many people feeling that the columns with certain competencies mapped into them don't represent the real-world experience of practitioners. So if we're talking about, the competencies and then column A, B, C, we're talking about really different ways of working. And with this in mind, it's also then of concern that inequality is then an issue due to the nature of the training routes represented in the current iteration of the framework. For example, with that, some critics have highlighted issues for marginalised group accessing the higher levels of training, which are much more expensive, take a lot more time, and then when it is expensive and takes longer, you bring in socioeconomic issues, which can be problematic. And then if we look forward with that one, that could actually impact the diversity of the field negatively, which is flagged by many to be a huge problem.